The pawns fall into place for the end of the war in Ukraine. What terms are on the table for the end of hostilities? And the next day in Ukraine, how is the US laying the carpet for this? 9 months after the start of the war in Ukraine, and one thing has already become clear to everyone: the more money the West pours in, the more problems become. And the reporter Vasily Galupin says, how much longer will Europe and America provide Ukraine with the billions of dollars worth of military and economic aid it needs every month to fend off Russia? Citizens, especially in Europe, since the Americans do not suffer the same consequences, reject the idea of indefinitely financing an endless and chaotic conflict with Russia. Besides, Ukraine's Western supporters have interests at stake. If the war escalates, there's a risk it will pull them in. The incident with the missile attack in Poland demonstrated the balance of terror until it turned out that it was Ukrainian bombing. A global alarm was sounded. Either way, Americans' gains from the war are already clear. Russia launched a costly war of its own. NATO's role was upgraded for European defense needs, and the US replaced Russia as the EU country's main energy supplier. And all this with the Europeans bearing the brunt of the consequences of the war, as well as the costs that will be required for the future support of Ukraine. For the Ukrainians, on the other hand, who suffered horrific losses, the outcome looks much more uncertain. Be that as it may, however, European governments do not have an endless supply of money, weapons, and intention, while America and China have other jobs. Negotiations with an eye on the next day. So although nothing predicts when the fighting will stop, the West is beginning to prepare for negotiations with an eye on the day ahead. The question now is to find an end, but the question is on what terms the war can be stopped. A mutually beneficial way must be found. Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, made an unannounced trip to Ukraine, to Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, November 4th, officially to pledge unwavering support, but at the same time, wrote The Economist, he urged the Ukrainians to think about future terms for peace. Sullivan seems to have assumed a key role. He's the person who does the hard work. Not only is he increasing pressure on Ukraine to find a solution, but according to the Wall Street Journal, he's in constant contact with Yuri Yushakov, who has served as Russia's ambassador to Washington. Yushakov is now Putin's foreign secretary advisor and one of the people considered to be a conduit to the Russian president. Sullivan is also talking to his counterpart in the Russian government. Joe Biden. Recently, Biden said that after the Kherson battle, Russia and Ukraine will be licking their wounds, quote unquote, and may be ready to compromise. After all, NATO diplomats have long said that peace talks could begin once again once Ukraine recaptures Kherson, which would allow Kiev to sit down at the table with a major victory. Kherson is now back in the hands of Ukraine. The New York Times revealed November 10 that one of America's top generals, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley, argued in internal meetings that on the battlefield, the Ukrainians have accomplished as much as they could before winter sets in. Now they should only focus on the negotiating table. The carpet for ending the war has already been laid by the US, and all the pieces on the chessboard are now in their places. The negotiation terms and difficulties of the West in arms stocks, the exact terms of any negotiation will largely depend on what happens on the battlefield. It's estimated that Russia and Ukraine have already lost around 100,000 troops each. Russia shows no sign that it's willing to throw in the towel, despite the withdrawal from Kherson. Ukraine is betting that more reinforcements will arrive during the winter. For starters, thousands of recruits already being trained by Britain and other Western countries. However, the West stockpiles of weapons are not unlimited. European armies already spent too much of their reserves, while even mighty America worries about its own capability in future wars. Vladimir Putin. The West is unclear about its own goals for the war. Biden has said at times that he wants Putin removed from power, and at other times that a sidetrack should be found for the Russian president. However, he always leaves the issue of the Ukrainian border out of the conversation. The West says this is something Ukraine will decide and that its own goal is to strengthen Kiev's negotiating position. On October 11, G7 leaders issued a statement demanding Russia's full and unconditional withdrawal from all occupied territories, except that the G7 statement is essentially a demand for Russia's total surrender, and this is not a realistic scenario. America still does not want to clarify its position, fearing that this could create rifts in the pro-Ukrainian alliance of countries. The three phases and amounts of reconstruction. At the Conference of International Donors held in Berlin in October, in order to determine the sums that would be needed for the next stay in Kiev, the Ukrainian Minister of Development, Chernisov, presented a three-phase plan. The first phase is the war period. That is the one we're going through, which according to Ukraine may last from 18 to 36 months. America, however, is in a hurry to greatly shorten the interval. Already the money flowing from Europe to the US and the US to Ukraine is not only for weapons and military aid, but to cover almost every need of the country, from salary payments to social benefits. Just covering Ukraine's budget deficit for 2023 will require $38 billion. The second phase, estimated to last 2 years after the end of the war, will require $105 billion for immediate needs, such as rebuilding housing, road networks, and basic infrastructure. The third phase, which will begin immediately after, will resemble the Marshall Plan. Here, an amount of total reconstruction will be required, which is still incalculable, from energy systems to the integration of businesses into European environmental regulations, to also serve Ukraine's ambition to join the European Union. Towards a model of Israel, and this is what, of course, Zelinsky wants, towards a model of Israel, divided Germany or Finland? Question mark? In addition to oceans of money, the West is trying to figure out what form Ukraine will eventually take after the hostilities end. There are three basic versions. Either Ukraine will become a new Finland, hence accept the loss of 20% of its territories and remain neutral for decades. Either it will look like Cold War Germany, separated by the war and with the free half of the country absorbed by NATO, with a natural wall of the Dnieper River. The third version is the Israeli model, a state under constant threat which manages to defend itself because of excessive military support from America. Some Eastern European countries are in favor of Ukraine joining NATO, but the Biden administration remains wary to negative in the thought of extending its nuclear umbrella to a country that will be in either a regular or latent conflict with Russia. This version necessarily includes a scenario of World War III, which the vast majority of NATO members reject without a second thought. The plan currently being worked on as the most desirable is a future state modeled after Western support for Israel. According to The Economist, this plan is not rejected by Zelinsky either. It's doubtful, however, whether Putin will accept it. Volodymyr Zelensky. Why the recovery of territories from Kiev worries the West more. In September, Rasmussen, a former NATO Secretary General, and Yermak, Zelensky's chief of staff, proposed the Kiev Security Pact, that is, security assistance, but no mutual defense agreement. The pact will strengthen Ukraine's armed forces, turning current emergency military support into a long-term commitment. Western partners will commit to multi-decade investments in Ukrainian defense. The pact requires neither Russian nor Ukrainian neutrality and would not preclude NATO membership. In some cases, there could also be military intervention by other states to help Ukraine. Russia is sure to reach to such terms. The proposed unrealistic Kiev Security Pact has reservations expressed even by the Biden administration, with officials wondering what commitments Ukraine will make in return. Ukraine insists military victory is its best prospect, even if it takes years to achieve. The war, however, is not waged by the Ukrainians alone, but relying on the West. And for other countries, Ukraine is not their only nor their most serious problem. Ukraine, for its part, calculates that the more territory it recovers, the greater the chance of getting rid of Russia. However, this is precisely what worries the West, which considers that something like this might push Moscow to use nuclear in the face of defeat. Not coincidentally, but the Biden administration has long since stopped saying, "We're helping Ukraine win." The US is the only one that can curb Ukraine's ambitions. One simple way is to not send the weapons Ukraine needs. They're already rejecting the deployment of Patriot fighters and long-range ATM-CMS missiles for fear of prompting Russia to use nukes. For the West, the problem of Ukrainian corruption, also under the Zelinsky regime and remains huge. The corruption in Ukraine, especially with the endless billions flowing into the country, all these extravagant amounts given by the West are not charity, but serve their own designs. And certainly the European Union will demand trade-offs for the rule of law. The next day for the voracious Zelinsky and his staff will not be easy. The fact that Biden was quick to dismiss the Russian missile scenario in Poland was a message primarily to the Ukrainian leader. Ukrainian missile strikes amid G20 and favorable timing for the end of the war were elegantly dismissed by an accident by the White House, but thoughts of provocation remain. When hostilities end, Russia will continue to rearm rapidly. Thus, Ukraine, seeing that its entry into NATO is moving away, bets on the security guarantees of the West. But the draft pact he proposes seems unworkable. The Western defense industry does not appear willing to arm Ukraine until it surpasses Russia, which is Kiev's goal. And secondly, the West cannot realistically have such a presence in Ukraine for much longer. Republican polls show that America needs to change its policy on Ukraine, and their party has gained veto power for the rest of Biden's term after securing majority in the House of Representatives. Citizens in more and more European countries are equally negative about the expensive support in Ukraine. Now the West's endless support for Ukraine cannot be taken for granted. This is from newsbreak.gr, and I've translated this for you from a Greek article. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.